for ourselves.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to take part in this debate, and I did listen particularly carefully to the speech of the Noble Lord Frost, who does represent a small but very vocal segment of this debate covered by this report and indeed the broader net zero issue. But I would like to correct one statement that the Noble Lord made about the RSA report. It does not assume a halving of electricity demand. I will quote a paragraph from the report. It says, "The demand for electricity in Great Britain in 2050 is taken to be 570 terawatt hours per year in this briefing, roughly twice the current annual demand." Now, I want to thank the committee for this report and the Noble Lady Baroness Kramer for her excellent introduction. From the 86 pages of the report and the 28 pages of government response, I'm not going to count the letter from the Right Honourable Mr Rees-Mogg, briefly relevant as the Secretary of State, but I'm going to make 3 points pairing both the report and that official response, because despite the change in government regime, it seems there's been disturbingly little change in government energy policy. Now, the Noble Lady Baroness Kramer focused on paragraph 121 of the Economic Affairs Committee's report, and I make no apologies for focusing on the same paragraph because it is so absolutely crucial. And it quotes Dr. Fatih Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, and I quote, "Nobody should imagine that Russia's invasion can justify a wave of new large-scale fossil fuel infrastructure in a world that wants to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, finish quote. Yet if we look at the government's response, both in its written response here and subsequently, the first reference here is to launching a new oil and gas licensing round, and that's exactly what the government has gone ahead to do. You might think the government has not read the report at all, and the Noble Lord preceding me was referring to the issue of stranded assets. I would point out the fact that the Committee on Climate Change estimates that new oil and gas licences take on average 28 years to begin producing. We are talking at a time when we clearly cannot be using any significant amounts of oil and gas. Now, the second point I want to make is the recommendation from the committee that the government publish an energy demand reduction strategy, focusing particularly on the area of home energy efficiency. Now, this is just one of the many disaster areas of energy policy. It's worth noting that insulation rates today are well below the rate they were in homes at the time of David Cameron, before that then Prime Minister decided to cut the green crap, so-called. And just looking at the Prime Minister's comments from the recent Tory party conference, you might have thought, given the focus on the need for green skills in the committee's report, and indeed something that's very often debated in your Lordship's House of the need for green skills, that might have been a focus of Tory education policy. So can the Noble Lord the Minister tell me how the proposed new British Baccalaureate, the major education policy announcement, fits with the green skills agenda? Now, thirdly, I want to pick up the committee's point on carbon pricing, on which it calls for clarity for investors and incentives to fund projects necessary for the transition. And I'm referring here to paragraph 171. Now, the official government response here has, of course, since been overtaken by events. What we've seen is a recent sharp decline in the carbon price attributable to the government's decision to release 53.5 million additional allowances from a reserve pot to the market between 2024 and 2027. What that means is that emissions prices have fallen to less than half of the EU equivalent when they used to be more or less at parity. Now, I credit the Financial Times for noting the actual impact of this, the economic impact of this. It's left British exporters facing hundreds of millions of pounds in EU carbon border taxes within the next decade. That means that money that would have been coming to the British Treasury would now be going to the EU. Is the government really happy about that?
Sir,